Session, a tete-a-tete with him. Thank you very much for holding on with patience. We know how much he has also borne with us today. Please.
Thank you very much. I'm very sorry everyone had to wait that long. It's very embarrassing for me. I was sitting on a runway thinking, would people wait for me? And secretly I was hoping people wouldn't, because then I wouldn't have to feel embarrassed by it all. But on the way I was told something that very ironically made me feel good. Also, I now have something in common. I may not quite have the intellectual largesse of Mr. C.K. Prahlad, but I have something else in common with him. We both get late on flights and come to these functions late. So while I may not quite have anything else in common with the great man, at least there's something else. There's just one other thing. I'm a little embarrassed by, I sometimes don't quite know where to look when people stand in front and say nice things about me. Most of those are come out of biodatas, but Mukesh bhai, please, the word sir is something I'm not used to, because I've got professors sitting here in front of me. They were more entitled to that. Mr. Bhogle was always my father. Even now people say Mr. Bhogle and look around to see if my dad's behind me. But I'm always Harsha, so I've always been that. In fact, when I first got my admission letter to this place, because in Gujarat, Harsha doubles up as a girl's name as well, my admission letter actually was addressed to MS Harsha Bhogle. And I wrote back to the SAC coordinator here saying, I don't know how many hearts I'm breaking, but there's a guy coming up, fellas. Anyway, so thank you very much. I'm not sure I'm quite the perfect person to sit here and talk about excellence. I'm only a sports broadcaster, and there's very often life shows up the littleness of what you do, and what's happened in Mumbai in the last 3 or 4 days shows up the littleness of cricket in our lives, and people who sit in front of a camera and talk about cricket, which is really all that I do. But I must tell you something related to what Mukesh bhai said. I was in Amritsar very early in my career once, and I saw this banner which tended to follow me around everywhere I went, and it said, Harsha brings Varsha. So it's something I've got used to, and you won't believe this. Today when I called up Jet Airways to ask if my flight was on time, the girl at the other end said, thank you for calling Jet Airways Varsha here. And I said, here we go again. I must confess, I'm a little gauche at most times, but I have a feeling of inadequacy while standing. By the way, if you're standing, there's lots of room on the steps. So please feel free. I'll feel more at home if you sit on the steps, because that's what I did quite often. So don't worry. I have a great feeling of inadequacy standing here, because to me, I came to IIM, and if you'll pardon me just a couple of minutes to talk about IIM Ahmedabad, because that's something that's very, very special to me. And I'll tell you why in just a moment. I was not sure of what I was getting into. I came from a very soft engineering course. I didn't know what I was getting into when I came here. And in my first 4 or 5 months, I was filled with awe. Believe me, till I came in here, I thought getting into IIM Ahmedabad would be the biggest thing I ever did in life. In my first 6 months, I realized that getting out was probably going to be bigger than getting in. And I remember at the end of my first term, and I'm waiting to meet Professor Dholakia, because he gave me a D in my eco paper, luckily the only one I got, and entirely justifiable, because I don't know what I wrote. I met Professor T.V. Rao that evening, and we're just coming out of the NR, and he took one look at me. He knew my mother, so I was always at my best behavior with him. And he said, are you all right? And I said, no, actually, I don't think I am. But I had a great sense of awe about coming to IIM Ahmedabad. But it did something else to me. As a PGP1, IIM Ahmedabad was terrible. It was terrible for me, not that the institute was terrible, it was terrible for me because I didn't know what to do here. I came here and I thought everybody in the world is better than me at everything in the world. And quietly when I sat down in my room, I realized that was true, which made it even worse. My second year here was still, in all the years of my life, the finest year I've ever had. Because I left this place aware of the fact that for all the inadequacies I perceived in myself, IIM Ahmedabad could accept me for who I was. And that was a huge feeling. Somebody suggested, why doesn't this guy become a combo captain? And I said, wow. And by the time I left, there was a girl who thought I was okay enough to want to spend the rest of her life with me. And till today, my father thinks that's the best thing I did at IIM. I out of respect, I don't disagree. Right. But I learned a lot here, and I always feel very emotional coming back here. And to do so in an auditorium like this, which didn't even exist then, but in an audience like this, I'm feeling a bit small, so just stay with me for a while. I'll warm up in course of time. I've even done that with Sidhu, so I can do that today. I'll talk not so much about excellence as I have had the opportunity, but from what I've seen around me, and over the last 2 or 3 years, through the opportunity that's been afforded to me by my profession to speak to some of India's top corporates on learnings from sport. I don't claim to know corporate India very well, but I do talk about learnings from sport. And while talking about learnings from sport, I also follow one of the earliest advice I ever got, which was to keep my mouth shut and my ears open. And you can see how well I followed that. And so I'm going to talk about excellence from all that I've allowed to come into my system over the years. The first, of course, is a perennial debate between what's more important, the end or the path. And I can understand why a lot of people believe that the end is crucial, because the end is often a driver of ambition. We always set ourselves these result goals and we want to get there at all costs. And the end is something that we look up to. It gives us that goal, it gives us the vision. And that end can sometimes be the driver of ambition. And heaven knows, most people come to this institute and most people go out of this institute, and a lot of people who are also part of the AMA are people with great ambition, and ambition needs a driver. That's what I keep telling my son, though he doesn't believe in it. But ambition needs a driver, and sometimes the ends are in themselves the drivers of those ambition. But I've discovered over the years, and it's happened to me, and I've seen that with a lot of people in sport. I'm not quite sure it happens in corporate life, but I've seen that in sport, especially in cricket, that having those kind of result goals, end goals, rather than journey or passage goals. When I say end versus path, I'm really talking journey versus destination. Most of us love the destination. As we grow older, as we see a little bit more of life, we realize it's a destination that counts for as much, if not more, than the journey. And I've discovered that the end at all costs attitude that pervades a lot of us these days is a source of great anxiety. It adds anxiety to our system. It adds more turbulence. One of the few things I remember from studying engineering was entropy. It adds to the degree of entropy in the system, the degree of turbulence in the system. Because the end starts to choke you after a while. Because if you can't get to the end, and getting to the end at all costs becomes so important that you forget that we need to exist for today as well. We're forever in search of that end. For me, at IIM Ahmedabad, that end was passing out with my head held high. And in my first year, I spent more time trying to figure out what grade I needed to get, rather than studying, which would have allowed me to get that grade in the first place. But I've also seen with a lot of young people that they set themselves these goals. They say, I must get 500 runs in this series, or I must score 300s in this series. And getting those 500 runs or getting those 300s then starts becoming, rather than an ambition, a great source of anxiety. And that can sometimes choke them. When Sandy Gordon, who was a psychologist at the University in Australia and worked with the Indian cricket team, met some of our youngsters, Yuvraj Singh told him he was getting very anxious about the fact that he wasn't scoring hundreds. And they worked together to give him a different set of goals. And he said, if you're batting at number 6, why don't you set your goal as being not out at the end of the innings and playing a winning role, rather than choking yourself by scoring hundreds? It does one other thing, and that is it provides, putting the result first, putting the end at all costs attitude, creates a temptation to do whatever it takes to win. And sometimes when we start to walk down that path of taking whatever it takes to win, we don't always check whether the path that we are following is the right one. It's fraught with danger. And too often we tend to go down that path. It's a classic question that presents itself here as well, isn't it? Of all the things, there are many things I admire about IIM Ahmedabad, but the thing that grates the most, not about this institute, but about the public perception of this institute, is what kind of salaries are students getting out of this place? I get the feeling that business schools and business newspapers are all that they care about IIM Ahmedabad is what is the highest starting salary, what is the average starting salary, and on a plot, if you plot a graph, where does 2005 starting salary compare with 2004? And where does it compare with 2003? And thank God, not where it compares with 1985. But we don't come here for a starting salary. That will be putting the end first. People come here to build careers. They don't come here to earn a starting salary. If you come here to earn a starting salary, you've already taken the first wrong foot in life. We come here to build careers. And I know of no human being in this world who's built a great career for himself and has thought, where's my next check coming from? And yet there are people who go in search of that check, and by 35, 38, they're saying, hang on, did I do right? So next time someone comes from a newspaper and tells you, so what starting salary are you expecting? Please stand up to your full height and say, I don't care. Because honestly, if you're from IMA, you needn't care. But that's a classic situation, I think, of putting the ends before the journey. Say, I'm here to build a career. On one of my first tours to Australia, I was working my backside off. And honestly, I think the fastest path to excellence is to work your butt off. Not necessarily to work every day in office till 9 o'clock at night, but try and work as hard as you can and do the best you can. And I wanted to do cricket commentary. And the Australian Broadcasting Corporation would not pay me for it because I was the overseas broadcaster. And the convention is that the overseas broadcaster is paid by his station. My station was all in